Rome's economic engine and Jerusalem. To understand how tightly this system operated, one must look beyond the legionnaires to see how Rome structured taxation across its empire. Rome did not rely solely on brute force, it relied on predictability. Each province was assessed with careful precision for its productive capacity. Imperial surveyors walked the fields, measured boundaries, and counted vines. Land surveys were conducted, and output was estimated based on ideal conditions. Once that final number was fixed in the imperial ledgers, expectations were rarely adjusted. Rome did not care if the rains failed or if locusts descended upon a village. A bad year for the farmer did not reduce the imperial appetite for revenue. This created a dangerous asymmetry. The risk belonged entirely to the farmer, while the guaranteed revenue belonged to Rome. Because taxes were often collected through tax farming, corruption was an incentivized feature. Private contractors paid Rome the expected tax amount up front for the right to collect it themselves. Anything they extracted beyond that was pure profit. The harsher they were, the richer they became. They were the visible face of an invisible machine, squeezing small communities to ensure their own upward mobility. For peasants living on the margins of subsistence, even small overcharges could trigger collapse. Debt contracts were unforgiving. Interest rates were often designed to ensure the borrower could never escape. Collateral was almost always the one thing that kept a family alive: the land. In the ancient world, land was not merely property. It was identity, inheritance, and the living memory of ancestors who had worked the same soil for generations. Losing the family plot meant far more than losing income. It meant a traumatic social descent. As large imperial estates, or latifundia, expanded by absorbing foreclosed small farms, day labor became the new reality. Former landowners were forced to hire themselves out as seasonal laborers on the very land they used to own. Economic independence faded, replaced by soul-crushing dependency. Meanwhile, urban elites were accumulating assets at an unprecedented rate. Some invested in these massive estates, while others poured wealth into trade or high-interest lending. To protect these interests, many maintained symbiotic relationships with the local temple authorities. This brings us back to Jerusalem. The temple was not only a spiritual symbol, it was a massive, pulsating economic engine at the center of Jewish life. The annual temple tax had to be paid with a specific currency, the Tyrian shekel. Valued for its consistent silver content, it was the only acceptable coin for sacred dues. Pilgrims from the far corners of the diaspora carried various regional currencies that had to be exchanged. This is where the money changers, the sarifs, stepped in. They provided a necessary service, but they did so by charging commissions that added another layer of burden to the weary traveler. Furthermore, the entire sacrificial system was intertwined with commerce. Sellers of sacrificial animals operated directly within the temple complex. According to the law, these animals had to be without blemish. Bringing your own animal was a massive risk. A single perceived flaw could lead to its rejection by the temple inspectors. Buying from the sanctioned temple system was safer, though significantly more expensive. In practice, full religious participation had become a matter of financial participation. For the wealthy, these costs were manageable, but for the poor, already squeezed by Roman tax farmers and debt collectors, these religious fees could be the final blow. Since the high priesthood operated with Roman approval, the institution sat at the intersection of faith and imperial order. Stability was consistently viewed as more important than justice. From Rome's perspective, the temple elites were invaluable intermediaries. They maintained the fragile calm, ensured the flow of taxes, and reduced the need for military intervention. However, for many ordinary Judeans, this alliance looked like collaboration, a betrayal of the very people the temple was supposed to protect. This perception mattered enormously. Economic systems do not collapse only when people suffer. They destabilize when people believe their suffering is unnecessary and fundamentally unjust. In first-century Judea, alternative visions were circulating like wildfire. Apocalyptic movements promised a divine reversal of fortunes, and wandering prophets spoke of a total restoration of the social order. Some groups withdrew entirely from mainstream society, viewing the existing structures as irredeemably corrupt. Into this volatile environment stepped Jesus. His language was saturated with the gritty imagery of the economy. He spoke of debts being forgiven in a world that never forgot a penny, laborers being paid fair wages for their sweat, masters calling their servants to settle accounts, shrewd stewards mismanaging the wealth of others. These were not randomly chosen metaphors. They were sharp reflections of the daily anxieties felt by his listeners. When he spoke of a kingdom, his audience did not necessarily imagine a place in the clouds. Many imagined a different social and economic order, one where exploitation was no longer the organizing principle of human life. The famous incident in the temple must be viewed through this lens. During Passover, the population of Jerusalem swelled with hundreds of thousands of pilgrims. The atmosphere was electric with religious fervor and political tension. Rome, well aware of Judean revolts, increased its military presence, with soldiers looking down from the Antonia fortress. In that explosive moment, Jesus disrupted the financial machinery within the sacred complex. Was it a symbolic act? Certainly. But symbolism can be profoundly destabilizing when it exposes a deep contradiction. By calling the temple a den of robbers, he was not launching a theological attack on prayer. He was issuing a devastating accusation of systemic extraction disguised as piety. The authorities understood the implications immediately. If the masses began to question the legitimacy of the temple's economic practices during the most sacred festival, the risk of a widespread rebellion would multiply overnight. Rome always intervened decisively. Within a generation, the accumulated tensions exploded into a total revolt. The Jewish-Roman War was catastrophic. Jerusalem was besieged, and the violence was beyond description. In 70 CE, the temple was destroyed, its massive stones toppled and its treasures carried to Rome to fund the Colosseum. The ancient priestly hierarchy was dismantled. However, the destruction did not end the imperial economic model. On the contrary, the Roman machine intensified its efforts. Land confiscations increased, taxes were reorganized, and bureaucratic control became more rigid. The extraction machine did not disappear, it simply modernized. Yet, despite the ruins, something permanent had shifted. The temple, the symbolic heart of faith and finance, was gone. But the communities that followed Jesus continued to grow without it. They experimented with radical new structures, mutual aid, the sharing of resources, and internal debt forgiveness. They built support networks that did not rely on the temple hierarchy or Roman approval. These communities were small and politically insignificant, but they represented a potent moral alternative to the empire's logic of extraction. Rome could crush armies, but it struggled to deal with narratives that offered a different way of being human. By the 4th century, the empire realized it could not win this war of stories and made a strategic adaptation. Instead of trying to eliminate this moral framework, it absorbed it. That decision reveals a crucial truth. Power requires more than soldiers. It requires legitimacy. It requires people to believe that the way things are is the way they must be. The economy of Jesus' time teaches an enduring lesson. Systems can endure vast inequality, deep-seated resentment, and even sporadic rebellion. The only thing they cannot endure indefinitely is the total collapse of belief in their own moral necessity. When people stop seeing their suffering as a natural, unchangeable law, when debt no longer feels like a deserved moral failing, when massive inequality no longer feels ordained, the foundations begin to crack. History does not repeat itself, but it reveals patterns. Once you see how economic systems wrap themselves in the language of morality, and how power defends itself through stories as much as soldiers, it becomes very hard to unsee it. To stay informed about these shaking moments in history, you can subscribe and turn on notifications.